All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Cynthia Kawasaki, Public Affairs Officer for Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. Thank you for joining us today and thank you for your interest and dedication on this very important topic of giant sequoia mortality. For your awareness, we are going to be live streaming this event on Facebook if connectivity allows us today, and we hope to make it available for viewing after the event. Please hold all your questions until the end, and we will have a Q&A session once all presenters are done. And then also materials from the report, photos, video, footage, all of the materials will be available on our website. So the news release should have gone out now, so that will be in your inbox with a link to our website with all of the supporting materials for your reference. So over the last couple months, you've been hearing us talk about burned area emergency response, what that process looks like, and what we hope to learn from that. One of the assessments that was done focused on giant sequoia groves, and based on some of this information, with further analysis conducted by a team of scientists with the National Park Service and the Nature Conservancy, we now have some estimates of just how damaging the KNP complex and the Windy Fire were to our beloved giant sequoias. Today, 4 members of the Giant Sequoia Lands Coalition are here to speak to these numbers, what they mean in the wake of the 2020 Castle Fire, and what the future holds for the protection of these iconic trees. These 4 land managers are connected by 2 fires, the KNP Complex and the Windy Fire. So I'll start off with some introductions. Joining us today and our presenters, we have Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Park Superintendent Clay Jordan, Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Park's Chief of Resources Management and Science, Christy Brigham, Sequoia National Forest Supervisor Theresa Benson, Tule River Tribal Council Chairman William Garfield, Tule River Tribe Forest Manager Brian Ruger, Lauren McDermott, Chumash Fire Department Cultural Specialist, Save the Redwoods League Director of Science and Conservation Planning, Joanna Nelson. Also with us today, we have Sequoia National Forest Public Affairs Officer, Alicia Embry. From our Sequoia Fire team, you may recognize Leif Matheson and Andrew Kramers right back there. Woohoo! Giant Sequoia Lands Coalition affiliate and park partner, Sequoia Parks Conservancy, represented today by Gary Rogers. A couple Sequoia experts are here with us today. We have Tony Caprio and Nate Stevenson, both critical to the research and science supporting the conservation of giant sequoias. Tony Caprio is also a co-author of the report we'll be referencing today. And then also joining us today, we have Save the Redwoods League, Tim Borden, Sequoia Restoration and Stewardship Manager. All right. So without further ado, I will go ahead and bring up Dr. Christy Brigham, co-author of the 2021 Sequoia Fire Impacts KNP Complex and Windy Fire Report.
Thank you, Cynthia. Just to echo what Cynthia said, a huge thank you to all of you for making the trek out to these beautiful trees. As we'll talk about today, climate change is a driving force in what we're seeing, and we can't fix climate change by ourselves, so thank you so much. I will try and be the numbers person today. To begin at the beginning, the 2 fires that became the KNP Complex, Paradise and Colony, started as part of a lightning storm on September 9th, 2021, the same lightning storm that started the Windy Fire. The KNP complex has burned 89,398 acres as of October 18th. Those acres are spread across Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks, Sequoia National Forest, Bureau of Land Management, private property, and state lands. And the fire right now is approximately 75% contained. These fires were full suppression fires from the moment they were detected, including the Windy Fire. As Cynthia mentioned, giant sequoias are of great interest to the public, which we really appreciate, due to their great size and age and charismatic appearance and all their wonderful qualities. They also sequester large amounts of carbon, second only to coast redwood on a per acre basis, and are important habitat for many species, including California spotted owl. Limited to approximately 70 groves, plus or minus. On the western slopes of the Sierra Nevada, only about 75,000 sequoias larger than 4 feet in diameter are estimated to be out there range wide, covering approximately 28,000 acres total. Managers and the public have had great concern with the KNP and windy fire effects to giant sequoias because of this public interest in the species, the importance of the species, and the impacts of last year's Castle Fire, which is estimated to have killed 10 to 14% of the entire population of large sequoias. This week, today, we are releasing a report co-authored by the Nature Conservancy and NPS scientists that reports on estimated impacts of the KNP and windy fire on large giant sequoias. I will now provide the range of estimates, acreages, percentages, all the numbers, by the numbers. Starting with the KNP complex. 16 groves had fire in them during this event. 4,374 acres of sequoia groves burned at a variety of severities, with anticipated beneficial impacts in areas of low or undetected change, but unfortunately with anticipated negative impacts to large sequoias in areas of moderate and high severity. Significant areas of high severity fire occurred in Redwood Mountain Grove, Atwell Grove, and Suwannee Grove. Small areas of high severity occurred in several other groves as shown on the map. KNP is estimated to have killed or damaged so severely that they will die within the next 3 to 5 years. 1,330 to 2,380 giant sequoias over 4 feet in diameter. So say it again without the muffled crying. 1,330 to 2,380 for the KNP. In the windy fire, last minute correction, one of the things that the Giant Sequoia Lands Coalition is working on is a unified grove map with unified names, numbers, and boundaries. We have not achieved that yet, so you will see a small correction in your hard copy. In the windy fire, 11 groves, at least 1,735 acres of sequoia groves impacted, significant areas of high severity in Starvation Complex and Deer Creek. Windy fire is estimated to have killed or damaged so severely that they will die within the next 3 to 5 years. 931 to 1,257 large sequoias. That estimate does not include trees damaged on groves contained entirely within the Tule River Reservation. For both fires, the total estimated loss is between 2,261 and 3,637 sequoias over 4 feet in diameter. This loss represents 3 to 5% of the entire population of large sequoias. I was asked many times during this event how this compares to the Castle Fire. The Castle Fire killed between 7,500 to 10,600 large sequoias. The combined impact of the KNP and windy is 2,261 to 3,637. So fewer estimated trees lost. Fewer large sequoias trees were lost in these events, likely due to several factors. The total grove acreage burned is less, so 6,109 grove acres in these two events versus 9,531 for the Castle. So less sequoia grove acreage burned overall. Less acreage burned at high severity, 14% on the KNP, 24% on the windy versus 30% on the Castle. Weather, as they say, it's better to be lucky than good. So we had a lot of the KNP that burned under an inversion and moderated fire behavior. Previous prescribed fire and mechanical treatments in and around groves moderated fire behavior and allowed our amazing firefighters to do some really great work to protect groves. And additional hard work of firefighters taken to protect sequoias, much of which was covered during the event. Backfiring operations, raking and thinning around individual trees, structure wrap applied to specific trees, sprinklers, fire retardant gel application, all the hard work put in by firefighters. While these losses are not as stark and large as the Castle Fire, they are still significant, unsustainable, and are outside the range of historic fire effects on large sequoias and are not what we are trying to achieve as we manage these magnificent forests for fire and climate change resilience. Why were these trees killed? A combination of fire exclusion in many areas for over a century, combined with climate change-driven hotter droughts, have increased fuel loads and changed fire behavior beyond what these incredibly fire-adapted trees can tolerate. Finally, we do expect to see beneficial impacts to giant sequoia groves and grove ecology in the majority of the grove area that burned at low and undetected severity. Thank you.
Next, we'll have Sequoia National Forest Supervisor, Theresa Benson.
Hi everyone, and thank you so much for coming out today for this important event. My name is Theresa Benson. I'm the Forest Supervisor for the Sequoia National Forest and the Giant Sequoia National Monument. And I'm going to share some information for you specific to the Windy Fire. And the Windy Fire also started the same day as the KNP Complex, September 9th. It was ignited by lightning on the Tule River Indian Reservation, and it spread onto the Sequoia National Forest, Giant Sequoia National Monument, growing to its final size of 97,528 acres, impacting 11 giant sequoia groves. 5 of those sequoia groves were entirely on the Giant Sequoia National Monument, 2 of them in the Tule River Indian Reservation, and then 4 of those groves are shared across boundaries with both the reservation and the Save the Redwoods League. So our initial assessments, as Dr. Brigham pointed out, the Windy Fire is expected to have killed an additional 931 to 1,257 giant sequoias. And I am going to tell you that it does not ever get easy looking at a monarch giant sequoia that has died. That is one of the hardest things that I have ever had to look at in my entire 30-year career with the Forest Service. It is not a good thing for our environment. The full suppression Windy Fire was contained on Thursday, November the 11th. Forest Service firefighters this year, in cooperation with federal agencies, tribes, state agencies, local governments, have been able to suppress 98% of all the wildfires in California this year. That is 1,100 different wildfires that have been suppressed in California. The Windy Fire, the acreage that I gave you, out of that 97,528 acres, approximately 77% of that was on Forest Service land. About 20% of that was on the Tule River Indian Reservation. And then the remaining 3% ended up on both Bureau of Land Management land and public land, including Save the Redwoods League. During the fire, we had the ability to put together what we called the Sequoia Task Force. And this was a special task force of firefighters that were able to get out ahead of the fire where possible and implement measures that were able to moderate the effects of the fire as the fire came into the different groves. Like Chrissy pointed out, the firefighters were able to get in as the fire was coming down the hill into these groves and pull fuel away from the bases of the giant sequoias, the monarchs, literally saving trees before the fire came in. The fire was coming in at a very high intensity rate in some of our groves. And we were able to see from the work that our firefighters did, some of our monarchs saved because of these heroic efforts that they took on the ground trying to save sequoias as the fire came in. After the fire was established in the grove, the firefighters came back in and applied what we called sequoia first aid. They came in with fire hoses, they sprayed down monarchs that were burning, and they moderated the effects of the fire, saving additional trees. It was amazing to see, and the dedication of our firefighters was a phenomenal thing. I don't know how many trees they ended up saving, but it was very heartening for me to see. Because of the sadness that we had of so many of our trees, our beautiful monarchs that were dying. You know, the giant sequoia trees have stood for thousands of years, and they are adapted to withstand frequent and low mixed severity fires, but nothing compared to the intensity experienced in recent wildfires. Until about 5 years ago, sequoia mortality from fire and other stresses such as insect attack was statistically rare. So what is needed to protect the giant sequoia? Fuels reduction work. That is one of the primary things that we need to be able to do more of. Getting into the groves, onto the forest and park and tribal and state and county land, and being able to reduce the amount of fuel that are around our giant sequoia trees. By reducing the fuels through prescribed burning and other density reduction treatments, the likelihood of future large, high-severity fires can be reduced. You know, we saw that in the case of the Windy Fire. We have an area on the Sequoia National Forest that has been managed for over a decade. Fuels have been removed, dead trees have been removed from this grove, and when the fire came into this grove, we saw the fire intensity go from high to low. And the impact to those giant sequoias, those monarchs, in the area of the Trail of 100 Giants is minimal. That tells you firsthand, on the ground, the need for us to be able to manage the groves in an active way if we are to be able to have them here for future generations. And lastly, we know that more productive work needs to be done to care for our forests. The Sequoia National Forest stands ready to move forward with our partners to meet this need and these critical pieces of work that I'm explaining for us to be able to have sequoias withstand into the future. And we're going to continue to work with our partners, the Tule River Indian Reservation, the National Park Service, Save the Redwoods League, CAL FIRE, and all of our other partners on best management practices to protect and restore our giant sequoias. Thank you.
Next, we will have some representatives from the Tule River Tribe and Shumash Fire Department.
Good morning, everybody. My name is William Garfield. I'm the chairman of the Tule River Indian Reservation of the tribe. Today I have with me our forester, Brian Ruger. You can step up here with me, Brian. And we brought the cultural specialist for the fire that represented the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Lauren McDermott. And today what we want to talk about is the technical side the tribe's been working on the fire and the cultural protections that we're looking to do moving forward. And then also the collaboration with the team here that we're all working together to rebuild a healthy forest. Right?
The Tule River Reservation has about 1,000 acres of giant sequoia within the forest, the mixed conifer forest that we have. The Windy Fire burned through portions of our 5 groves. So we have 5 groves, 3 that we share with the Forest Service, 2 that are distinctly on tribal lands. And all 5 of them had some fire during the 2 months that the Windy Fire burned, September and October. The fire severity, the burn severity, varied quite a bit within those groves. Most of the severity was at the low and moderate intensity, and some of the areas burned severely, a high burn severity, which resulted in some mortality of some of the monarch trees. We don't have an exact count. I know everybody likes numbers. but it would be fair to say we lost more than 20 of the big trees. One of the things we found, though, we've had a fairly active management program throughout our forest and within the groves. And the areas that burned less severe, less than high severity, had some fuels work done in the past. In fact, we had a crew active in one of the groves as the fire broke out, and the fire suppression crews were able to do their firing operations off our project work and felt that they could burn safely back into the fire. So fuels management is very important, regardless of how it's done. Everybody has their own way to do it. Land managers need all the tools available, whether it's prescribed fire, old-fashioned handwork, people with chainsaws, and even selected use of heavy equipment. So it does work. Looking ahead, I think it's very important that we do work with our neighbors. Fire knows no boundaries, so we border the Giant Sequoia National Monument and we share groves, and so we hope to, keep an active management program going in those groves and the surrounding areas. When you think of how these fires burn and they get a head of steam going up a steep drainage, active management has to go on not just within the groves or around specific trees, it has to go beyond the grove boundaries so that fire intensities will be lowered as they approach groves. So thank you very much.
You guys want to thank you guys all for coming. My name is Lauren McDermott. I'm from the Tule River Tribe. I'm a tribal member, and I'm also a cultural specialist. Work for the Chumash Fire Department, and I came on the Windy Fire for since October 9th. I was on the Windy Fire, and working closely with the chairman, we kind of discussed some of the tribal issues with the redwoods and the concerns, some of the cultural areas, and all the stuff that goes along with the redwoods, because they've been there like thousands of years, and also our people's been there for thousands of years. So we got a lot of connection between us and the redwoods and the land that surrounds it. So it's like a special area for us, and it holds a lot of concern. So along with all these other agencies, we kind of want to protect that for the future. So that's why we're here trying to put our best foot forward, and we're thankful for all these other agencies to kind of see that vision that we're trying to carry out as well, because like I said, all these cultural concerns that come and rise with these fires and the kind of mismanagement of these forests are kind of lack of work that hasn't been done. We're trying to put the best foot forward for the tribe and also the other agencies as well to kind of get the best product for the future of the redwoods. And the knowledge is key, so like you guys are helping us spread this knowledge, so I appreciate everybody being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. And I'll finish with saying, thank you for all the partners that allowed us to come here and speak today and express our concerns. The main goal is to protect the redwoods. They carry a lot of history, as just mentioned, and if they're gone, that history is gone. So thank everybody for being here today.
Very well said. Next up, Dr. Joanna Nelson with Save the Redwoods League.
Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I'm Joanna Nelson, Director of Science and Conservation Planning with Save the Redwoods League. I'm honored to be here today to represent our nonprofit conservation organization as a coalition partner in protecting the iconic giant sequoia, the world's largest and one of its oldest tree species. Save the Redwoods League was launched in 1918 with a mission to protect, restore, and connect people to California's iconic redwood and giant sequoia forests. More than a century later, the forests face an existential threat that would have been unimaginable to our founders. Today, wildfires exacerbated by drought, climate change, and fire exclusion are occurring at a frequency and severity that, if allowed to continue at the current rate, could wipe out these irreplaceable and magnificent giants. We join our coalition partners today to assert that we cannot and will not allow that to happen. The KNP Complex and Windy fires arrived on the heels of 2020's Castle Fire that our collective research has now shown killed as many as 14% of these monarchs. When you add that to the 2021 mortality estimates being shared today, it means that we may have lost nearly 20% of these incredible natural treasures in a 14-month span. That is unacceptable. Losing a tree that is 1,000 or more years old, 2,000 years, 3,000 years is a tragedy. So let's call this what it is, an emergency. If we had lost 20% of the Grand Canyon, or the Statue of Liberty for that matter, the people would expect immediate action. We shouldn't expect anything less with our beloved giant sequoia. The measures that ultimately saved the giant forest hold the key to how we can protect the 19 groves that haven't yet burned in wildfire since 2015. And again, we use 2015 as this milestone because that's a really big uptick in fire extent and severity. While photos of foil insulation wrapped trees captured the imagination of people around the world, what actually helped the giant forest survive was the decades of prescribed burn treatments that mimic the natural cycle of low intensity fire that these forests evolved with. Unfortunately, not all of the groves hit by the KNP Complex and Windy Fire had the benefit of these active treatments. The practice of prescribed burning is unequivocally supported by both current Western science and the traditional cultural knowledge and science of indigenous peoples. For millennia, Native Americans stewarded these forests well and wisely, and they continue to steward these forests despite violent interruption. It is both heartening and just that the Tule River Tribe, represented here today by Chairman William Garfield and colleagues, is a key partner in the coalition's efforts to reestablish these practices as our renewed care. Indeed, we need to bring all stewardship practices to bear if we are to save these forests. We must tend them with consistent stand-to-landscape scale work. We must engage selective thinning, understory burning, both prescribed fire and cultural burning led by indigenous practitioners, and other fuel reduction and risk reduction mechanisms. And it must all happen now and on an ongoing basis, before next year's wildfires and the next and the next. Treating these forests may be expensive, but that cost represents just a fraction of the hundreds of millions of dollars taxpayers have spent fighting these wildfires and the sweat and risk our firefighters have spent. In this year's budget, California has allocated more than $1 billion for forest management and wildfire prevention, has passed positive legislation such as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, with more legislation pending that would be beneficial for conservation and sequoia forests that I'd be happy to talk about afterwards. Funding isn't the only factor. We must also align policy and permitting around the priority of protecting the giant sequoia, and we need a trained conservation workforce that can do the necessary work quickly, skillfully, and at scale. It is vital that our collaborative efforts be enabled to act on the ground and fast. We need the full weight of conservation communities and our lawmakers to quickly coalesce around shared goals and priorities. The path forward is clear. We cannot and will not allow the giant sequoia losses of the last 2 years to continue. We know what must be done, and we are committed to making it happen together. Thank you.
With closing remarks, we have Superintendent for Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks, Clay Jordan.
All right, thanks, Cynthia. Good morning, everybody. Move this out of the way here. So, as has been mentioned, last year's Castle Fire killed upwards of 10,000 trees, which constituted 10 to 14% of all the giant sequoias on the planet. And for us, I think as sequoia managers, land managers over these sequoia groves, this really served as a call to action, as highlighted by in the fact that we're in new territory as land managers. These sequoias have stood for, as we talked about, for thousands of years. They have, their relationship with fire for most of that time has been very positive. They're dependent on that fire as long as it's low intensity. But now, as we've seen with the combination of drought and heavy accumulations of fuels that have gathered over the last 150 years, we're looking at new threats to these incredible trees that we haven't seen for thousands of years. So it really prompted us, what more can we do? What actions can we take? And so we recognize that if we're going to be successful in protecting these sequoias so that future generations can have the same experience as us, we need to take coordinated action. We need to, and that really equates to a lot of organizations working together, not to protect our individual groves and our individual statutory lines, but to work together and to protect them across the range. So on the heels of the Castle Fire, we launched the Giant Sequoia Lands Coalition, a collaboration of all the land managers responsible for the stewardship of giant sequoia groves existing on public and tribal lands. These 11 federal, tribal, state, and local agencies are supported by numerous other government and nonprofit organizations with a shared vision for ensuring that future generations will be able to walk around these very same trees that we're able to do so today. We're approaching our work towards this coalition as using a three-pronged approach: learn, rally, and act. So LEARN refers to the coordinated research and monitoring that allow us to better understand the threats to these trees and how we might mitigate them to protect them into the future, and to be able to share that information and share the resources among all the partners. Rally refers to increasing the awareness of the threats facing these trees, and to garner support and to build new partnerships that enable us to amplify our effectiveness. And ACT refers to the on-the-ground work that will result in landscapes that are better prepared, that are more resilient to fire as these groves face large wildfires associated with climate-driven drought into the future. And so already this year we've talked about some of the unprecedented actions that have taken place during the fires, during the KNP Complex and the Windy fires. And as we've heard, we feel good that we were able to reduce the mortality. We saved some of these incredible trees through some of the techniques that we've talked about. But this really needs to be considered a last line of defense. We cannot put it on the firefighters as the fire is advancing. Because as we learned this year, a lot of the time that doesn't work. That there are not enough tools available at that moment for firefighters to be able to apply. And firefighters, we cannot pit the protection of our communities against the protection of our trees at the same time. So it's really important that we act before the large wildfire events. And this means, as we talked about, restoring the natural process of low intensity fire that is beneficial to the groves and for the forest lands. And the key is this is not all about giant sequoias. The giant sequoias are iconic, but it represents all the hundreds of other tree species, the healthy, resilient, mixed conifer forests. So what is good for the sequoias are certainly good for the general forest environments. And that's by introducing more prescribed fire on the landscape so that we can have all the sequoia groves protected by prescribed fire, as we have been able to protect some of some of these groves. They're probably the greatest success in the protection of giant forests, for example, and the General Sherman tree was the prescribed fire that has been going on for decades prior. And when the conditions allowing some of those natural wildfires to burn when conditions are conducive for allowing them to do so. And when prescribed fire is too risky to apply, restoring healthier forests that are by performing some restorative thinning is important to reduce those unnatural accumulations of those forest fuels that, when mixed with drought, create that deadly combination of the high intensity fire that we've experienced. So while these actions require a major commitment of funding and effort, the good news is the actions that we take that protect our mixed conifer forest are those same actions that make our community safer, because it's all about reducing those large conflagration fires. And so I'm confident that by working together, we can make sure that these monarchs will be around for generations to come. And I'm very excited to be working with our partners here. Of course, today what we have assembled are those coalition partners, those land stewards that have experienced losses from these two fires in this fire season. But we're also joined by the remaining coalition partners across the rest of the range that is hoping that we can be effective before their groves are threatened by fire. And with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Cynthia and for any questions. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and take questions now, and let us know if your question is directed to someone specifically so they can come up to the podium. Stephanie?
Thank you. First, my question is, from anyone that's up here, did anyone actually see one of the giant sequoias when it was torching out during this last fire season? If so, that's who I want to ask a question to. Yeah, it looks like you. Yeah. Theresa, can you come up to the mic so we can hear you?
Okay.
I was moved by what you were saying earlier about what it's like to see this, but because this is such a rare visual, what exactly is it like to see a giant sequoia completely up in flames?
So the sequoia that I saw specifically is one that we actually were able to save. So I'm gonna add that to it. It's in the area of the Trail of 100 Giants, in the Giant Sequoia National Monument, and what happened is the fire came down the hill and it went into the trees around this giant sequoia, and then those trees spread the fire up into the crown of this tree. And the firefighters alerted us to it, and we actually came up with a really innovative, I thought it was an innovative plan, that we were able to hire some of our smoke jumpers from Reading, Forest Service smoke jumpers. They came down, they assessed the tree, and this is a tree that it's actually bigger than the trees behind you. It's probably even bigger than that one. And we had two smoke jumpers that they figured out how to climb to the top of this sequoia tree, and they got a fire hose and fire trucks and a lot of extra water, and they were able to get the fire hose down into the middle of the tree, and they took a video for me of what it looked like in there. And basically what you could see is there were flames in the tree. There was a lot of smoke, and there were flames. They were probably about a foot. Some of them were about a foot, and they were just basically creeping around in the interior of the top of that tree, slowly killing. They were going to slowly kill that tree, and it was going to take. It would have probably taken it a few weeks, maybe, to have killed that tree. And so they got that hose in there and they put that out. However, we had trees from the Castle Fire, and I know that Save the Redwoods League and the Tule River Reservation had them as well, that we even have some that are still smoking that died last year. So over a year later, they're still smoldering in the interior of that tree. And so what it is that interior part of the tree is burning, and it can burn for over a year. That's what I've seen firsthand, and I'm sure that there's other accounts that other people have, but it wasn't like the flames were just shooting up out of the tree in the sky. They were inside the tree, and like I said, for over a year for some of these trees.
Did you have one too that you saw? If somebody else saw one that was like torching out, I really do want to know what that's like.
We did. We had the same experience where the fire was got into a steep area where the fire was in the tree, and the hoses that we had from the ground couldn't reach it. They tried to do water drops from the top, which caused more damage because the water drops caused some of the branches to start breaking. So they had to get the smoke jumpers in there to get up in there and extinguish the fire. But I was going to mention, if you didn't, about the previous fire, Castle Fire, there was still some spots that were made available, and the area was being assessed.
And what was that like, though? What was the feeling for you seeing this?
It was just kind of seeing the forest burn overall for us was disheartening. I mean, I know that our teams had been working hard to make sure the protections were there, but just the severity, the steepness of the slope just didn't allow personnel to be in there safely. So what we lost to us was really detrimental to us and sad for our people.
Other questions? Carmen?
Yeah, just thanks so much to all of you for what you've shared. And I wanted, maybe this is a good question for Christy. Just looking to get more information about, the work that went into your estimate for the mortality. I know with the Castle Fire, I think it was largely based on that satellite imagery, the RAVG, and I think last I heard was probably the final of that would come out to maybe early next year. Is it the same kind of situation here where this is kind of preliminary and you'll follow it up with some field work and all that?
Yeah, so Carmen, what I think you're asking about is preliminary estimates versus field verified inventories. And this set of preliminary estimates for these two fires was generated using a very similar method to the Castle Fire estimate. So it is a combination of satellite imagery that uses four classes of composite burn index to evaluate vegetation change before comparing an image before the fire and after the fire. But that is then cross-referenced with 3 field data sets in this case, where field surveys were conducted post-fire for in this case, the railroad fire, the pier fire, and the rough fire. And those are the mortality estimates. And so the same approach here. And we are not done with our field surveys from the Castle Fire, and these would be good questions to ask Tony Caprio when we're in the field. What Tony and I have talked about and what we have observed in the field is that the trees that we thought would be dead based on crown torch or significant percentage of crown scorch are in fact dead. And we have not seen anything in the field that contradicts these estimates and the idea that these fires are capable and are killing these large trees. And in fact, for this current estimate, I am actually concerned that this is an underestimate because of the way the moderate severity is mapped by this analysis compared to what we observed from the helicopter and from some ground surveys. So the definitive answer is the field data, and it's very important data, and I am hugely thankful to all the staff of the Park Service, the Forest Service, and the universities who are out cataloging the losses. But at this time, we do not have anything to indicate that these are not the correct range of estimates.
Do you know when the final might be expected for that and the Cal Fire? Would it be next year, probably?
Yeah, I'm actually really hoping that Tony Caprio will take some time off. He is one of the, I think like me, he has not had 2 consecutive days off in a really long time. So once he has had a nap, then I will ask him when we might have ground checked full analysis of our Castle Fire data.
Great, thank you.
Can I ask you, can you tell us of all the trees that burn, how many are in areas where the public actually have access to go see them?
That is such a good question, and one that I have conflicting emotions. Not a lot. The answer is not a lot, and that's part of the problem. So sequoia groves that are easily accessible are the ones that we've spent a lot of time taking really good care of. So they're places that don't tend to have torched monarchs. And the worst place that I personally have seen is a little grove of ours called Board Camp. And it is 8 miles into the wilderness, 4 of it off a trail. So it's very difficult to get journalists to go there or people who don't know what I'm talking about to go there. And we do have photos and videos, but it's exactly what you're asking. These places that are burning at such high severity, they are difficult to access and they are not places people go to regularly. That's why one of the reasons why they have not received previous treatments and are burning at such high severity.
Thank you.
I was wondering, in these high severity areas where it's a large scale burn of high severity, do you know yet whether giant sequoias will come back in those areas? Have you determined that yet?
That's a great question, Vic. So what Vic's asking about is the potential for regeneration failure in sequoia grove areas that have burned at high severity. And this is another emerging phenomenon and one that we do not understand well. There are definitely high severity areas in those previous fires, Rough, Pier, Railroad, that have come back quite well, where the canopy trees were damaged or killed and there was seed left on the ground and the seed survived and you get beautiful dense thickets. Now they're not monarchs, and they won't be for quite some time, but they are sequoia trees and they are lovely to see. I personally have seen and have spent 2 grueling days in the core burned area of Board Camp Grove, where about 40 acres, contiguous acres in the center of the grove, burned at high severity, and the trees are not alive. And there are not seedlings. There are scattered seedlings, little patches in a ravine here and there, but not enough to bring back sequoias in that area. And that is a concern of ours, and we have done a preliminary spatial analysis to identify areas that we need to look next spring and see, are there seedlings there? Is there regeneration? If there is, great. Thank goodness. But if there isn't, then we need to ask the hard questions about how committed are we to sequoias in that area and what are we going to do about it?
Christy, what was it like for you to go through that area the first time?
It was terrible. Tony and Nate were there too. I think we had all seen drone footage and helicopter footage, which made me cry in my home office surrounded by dirty dishes. But I think I'll only speak for myself. I know that I had a hope that when I went there in person, it would not be as bad, and it was worse. And I wish it was closer, because I think if more people could see that, we would not be having to make an effort to convince people that this is a problem. It is terrible. It is like walking on the surface of the moon. There were almost no seeds. There were almost no sequoia cones. There was no vegetation on the ground. Trees this big were completely black with all the needles gone. And to imagine how big of a flame do you need to burn to the top of this tree and burn up that canopy. The reason those branches are that high off the ground is to keep them safe from fire. So I hope anybody who wants to hike 8 miles through a bunch of really loose soil and pokey shrubs to get to a sequoia grove that now looks like the surface of the moon, I'm not happy to take you, but I would take you.
Lila? Sorry, Lila. Sorry, we have.
I just wanted to add to that a little bit on some of the efforts from our side. And what you're saying is exactly correct. You know, one of the things that we're going to be battling is time, because the water's coming in soon, and we have to really control the erosion, because once it starts raining hard, the water starts running off these steep slopes that ain't going to hold. All those new seedlings are just going to wash on by. So we're really on a race for time here to get this work done before the winter comes in. Thank you.
Go ahead, Lila.
Well, are there, there's discussion about this need to clear fuels. Are there imminent plans to do that? When might that be implemented, and what would that process look like?
Yeah, you go.
Yeah. Well, speaking for the Forest Service, so we have 33 groves that we manage as a part of the Giant Sequoia National Monument, and we have a monument plan that gives us the guidance of what we need to be able to do to manage the sequoia groves. One of the things we've already started to do under our monument plan guidance is we're writing a fuels management plan for every one of the groves. And basically what that is looking at each grove individually and determining what does that specific grove need. Some of our groves need a lot more work than other groves. And so that is our first step. And then we're also working on what the environmental documentation will be that we'll need to do in order to be able to implement what needs to be done in these groves. And that's going to be a variety of work, and there's a variety of different things that are needed by grove, but that'll be, like Brian Ruger from the Tule tribe said, we need all the tools that are available to us to be able to manage in these groves. We need to be able to do a variety of different types of work, everything from piling and burning those piles, prescribed burning, and in some cases going in and doing some thinning of the trees that are in the groves that will help those groves withstand the next large fire that comes there. So that's the next steps for us in the forest, and it's a very high priority for us, and we're looking at we're actually starting that work right now. It's underway, and we're hoping that this next year we're going to be able to build a lot more momentum and get a lot of that work done in collaboration with Save the Redwoods League and the tribe that are our adjacent neighbors there in the monument.
Any other questions? Vic?
You've been doing all of this, the thinning, the prescribed burning for all these years. Is part of the problem you just don't have enough money to pay enough crews to do that all over the Sierra, or even in this park and in the reservation? And does any of the federal money from these recent legislative efforts, is that going to be sufficient funding to do to be significant for you guys?
Well, I think anything we get is an improvement. And yes, we've had a very active prescribed fire program since the 1960s. But if you think of the percentage of the land, it equates to a small percentage. So we have focused on a lot of those groves that have been more accessible, that we can get in there and effectively treat them easier, kind of the low-hanging fruit, if you will. But also our prescribed fire has also been focused on urban interface. and protection of some of the vulnerable sections of the community. So there has not been enough in order to treat all of these groves. Now, the consequence, the good news, bad news from the fires from the last 2 years is we now have seen in Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks, I think it is 28 groves, 28 of our 37 groves I think we have that have now burned through. A lot, some of them with, we paid a high price and we've lost some sequoias, but many of the groves, the fire burned through low intensity, and so regardless, they're treated. And so now we have a much smaller piece of the pie to be able to focus on, and makes it much more realistic to be able to get in there. But we are looking at how we can treat some of these more remote groves, and the drought giving us such intense and long fire seasons is a real challenge to us, because it's the same firefighters that we're dependent on for the prescribed fire program are the same firefighters that are then fighting the wildfires. And so our windows of opportunity for prescribed fire is much less. This year we did not conduct any prescribed fires in Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks, simply because the drought was so great that the risk of doing prescribed fire was too great. And that's where substituting for prescribed fire by doing some of that restorative thinning of some of those smaller fuels can be important to be able to try to replicate those natural processes to make those forests more resilient.
I imagine that one of the tasks is to try to stay ahead of climate change in essence.
Yeah, climate change is a big challenge. And the jury is still out as to what the effects of the climate change and what the drought, long-term drought, will have on these trees. It is certainly a concern. We also know, though, that if you go back to the Middle Ages, right? Now, it may seem like that is a long time ago, and it really is. But these trees that we're seeing were here in the Middle Ages, and they experienced some drought in the Middle Ages. And they survived. As we can see, they survived these trees. The difference between the droughts of those times and now was that presence of naturally occurring fire. So we know that these trees experienced fire across their lifespans on average every 10 to 20 years from lightning strikes. And then with some of the stewardship by Native American tribes later on, so that kept a lot of the heavy accumulations of fuels down. The forests were not as dense, and so what we have now is drought, but with the higher accumulation of fuels. So the drought we can't do anything about in the short term, but the accumulation of fuels is something that we can address.
Josh, you had a question?
Yeah, there was a study released out of UC Irvine this week finding that the effects of fire in the Sierra for each degree of warming, it's much worse basically than we had previously anticipated. And so my question is, in light of that, are these fuels reduction projects, are these prescribed fire projects, are they really going to be enough to not only bring us to where we need to be, but to also counteract those effects of climate change on the forestscape?
Great, thank you for that question. So I'd like to address a little bit of Vic's question that he just asked, and then yours. So is it only about funding, or is the funding enough? So again, having narrow windows or having things that need to come together in a confluence to be able to do prescribed fire. So needing to have the right weather conditions, So we call ourselves firelighters. People doing prescribed fire have the same basic training as firefighters. So again, needing the trained folks, needing the environmental documentation done that Theresa mentioned, and having all of that come together, where firefighters at the end of the season are often laid off and exhausted. And so we either are asking those same people, or we're asking a different crew of prescribed fire folks to be on call and ready. So those are some of the things that have to come together, and some of the policy that helps is AB 642, bringing forward more cultural burning, a prescribed fire claims fund of $20 million, and SB 335 for gross negligence liability, so that firelighters know that somebody has their back. So those are the things that have to come together. And then Josh, I'm on your question now. For each degree of warming, things will get a lot worse. So Dr. Brigham mentioned we can't address climate change, climate disruption on our own, and that is a societal problem that needs quick action. So it does, there is a vicious circle where things can get worse and worse, where with warming, we lose more of these trees and their carbon storage, right? That's not all they are, is functional units of carbon storage. They're incredible live trees. And we do walk into that vicious circle, right? The worse it gets, the worse it gets. So we need to hop into the better it gets, and make sure that we are making commitments, everything we can do towards 1.5 degrees C of warming being a cap. And that's gonna take reductions in emissions. It's gonna take action. So again, that we are looking at nature, that we're looking at soils and trees and other ways that we really rely on locking in that carbon. Other parts of the world, permafrost. So we have to make it possible for these ecosystems to function. Thanks.
And just one quick thing on that too is, I also think Rebecca Solnit says that hope comes from action in the face of uncertainty, and no one knows what is going to happen. I would love to build a time machine, but I'm too busy trying to save giant sequoias. So if one of you could work on that, these are all hypotheses about what the future will be. And you have to ask yourself, am I going to do nothing in the face of those hypotheses and say, well, it's over, let's give up? Or am I going to take action and generate hope? And that's what we see people doing around the world to address the trash gyre in the ocean or carbon emissions. And that's what we're trying to do, is act in the face of uncertainty to create a future that we're happy about.
Yes.
Just a couple of points about your question on resources and how that becomes so important. When we talk about doing treatments within groves, vegetation management treatments, it's not just a one-time treatment. They're periodic, there's maintenance after that every 10, 15 years, which have costs associated with them. And the second thing is, we're not just looking at a defined perimeter within a grove boundary, but we have that general forest area that influences fire and pest management and all that within the grove. So the acres become much bigger than just grove acres. So. Thank you.
So we are over our time, but there will be an opportunity on the tour. You have a couple hours to connect with people one-on-one and get some more questions answered. For those joining us on the tour, we want to bring everyone together real quickly just to make sure we're all on the same page as far as caravanning. We will gather right here. So if you could pack up your vehicles and get things, packed up pretty quickly so that we can get out to the field. We are going to be driving down the road you came in and going into that fire closure that you saw on the way here onto the General's Highway. We'll be driving down some miles until we get to the Redwood Mountain Road. It's a 2-mile dirt road that you'll be driving down on. I'm hoping that your vehicles have a little bit of clearance because that, it's a dirt road. So we want to make sure if you don't have a vehicle with high clearance, talk to us. We may have some room for carpooling, or maybe you all can carpool together. And then from there at the trailhead, from there you'll be walking those 2 miles. You will need to put on your hard hats when we get down there, and make sure you're wearing your layers. You have plenty of water. It's 2 miles slightly uphill, and then it'll be 2 miles back. And on that walk, and once we get down to Redwood Mountain Grove, you'll have some opportunities for interviews. We do want to be mindful of timing, because all of you need to get back and write your stories and do all your work. So we're hoping to be done with that tour portion by 3 o'clock. So that just gives us, 2 to 3 hours for that. So I'm going to send you all to go pack up your cars. Please drive in this direction. We will be escorted by a fire truck, and we'll also have a fire truck at the end to kind of keep us all together. It's important that we all stay together for this entire trip.